Genesis 18, I'm going to start reading in verse 16. It says, "And the men rose up from thence and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham anything which I do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. And the Lord said, Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord." I'm going to stop there. I'm going to, real quick, since our series is on go, the verse where we're going to get the majority of this is verse 21. He starts it out, "I will go down now." Let's go ahead and pray. To this point in this series, again, looking at the word go, it has been directed at someone else. And majority of the time through this series, as I've been kind of studying ahead, the majority of it will be directed at someone else. The first message was directed at Satan in the Garden of Eden after he had tempted Eve, and Adam and Eve had both sinned, and God tells Satan, "From henceforth this is how you'll go." It was directed at Satan. The second week it was directed at Noah and his family. The flood had just happened, and they had just been through the building of the ark and the flood and all that went with that, and God says, "You're not done yet. I still have work for you. I want you to go." Last week was looking at Abram earlier in his life when God tells him it's time for you to go out of the country that you're in, leave where you are, because I have something for you to do. And so to this point, it's all been directed at someone else. And again, the majority of this series, I believe, will be that way. God telling a person or group of people to go, that He has something for them to do. This evening's message, however, is a little different than that, because in this passage, when God says go, He's talking to Himself. The verse we just read, it isn't "you will go," it's "I will go." He's talking to Himself. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are wicked cities. The verses that we read tell us a little bit about it. That the cry of the city. I did some studying about that statement this week, because I thought, it's interesting that God says He's going to come check it out because of the cry of Sodom. I did some studying about why does the cry of Sodom mean that God would come to destroy him? What would cause that? I don't like crying, but I've never thought because someone was crying I should destroy him over it. So what does that mean? And I found kind of two sort of kind of leading opinions on it that I want to mention. The first was the cry of Sodom. What they said is it meant they flaunted their sin, that they were flaunting it. The scholars said that their cry wasn't a cry of sadness, or this scholar at least said their cry wasn't a cry of sadness or a cry of fear. It was a cry of, "Hey, look over here. Look what we're doing. Look what we're getting away with." They were sinning, and they knew they were sinning, and they didn't care. And worse than just not caring, they wanted everyone else to see exactly what they were doing. They were proud of it, which in the time we live isn't very hard to believe. I was thinking about it. It wouldn't have been very long ago that this kind of would have been hard to see. But in the time we live, it's pretty easy to see. We're living in a time that is filled with sin, and that they're proud of it. It's why, we have things like gay pride parades and all those sorts of things. They're proud of it. It's crying out, "Everyone look at me, look what I'm doing, look at my sin." It's proud of it. And some scholars say that's what this cry of Sodom was the people saying, "Hey everyone, look at us, look what we're doing." And the other kind of leading view that I saw was this, that the cry was those abused by the sin of Sodom. And I'm not going to go into any detail at all. I'm going to try to kind of stay away from it as much as I can. But the Bible makes it very clear the sort of sins that these cities were involved in. For one thing, it's known as the sin of sodomy. There's a reason for that. Yeah. For another thing, when the angel of the Lord came to Sodom and the men wanted to abuse them, And instead, Lot gives them a woman who, one of his daughters, who the Bible puts it had never known a man, and they abused her all night. And the way the Bible puts it makes it real obvious that wasn't an unusual thing. That wasn't abnormal. And I'm purposely trying to kind of be tactful about it, but there would have been some tears. There would have been some crying going up from those abused. And I don't know which it was, or if it was either one of those. But either one of those would warrant God saying, I need to check out their cry. The Bible says God decided to go because their cry, but also God decided to go because their grievous sin. Verse 20, he words it that way, and I personally find it interesting because God sees all sin as sin. It's all on the same plane. Whether it's a lie or a murder, it's all sin, yet God describes their sin as grievous. It grieved him. They are wicked, wicked cities, and because of their wickedness, God says, I need to go. I need to go. Last week I told you the title of the message was When God Says Go. Tonight, kind of flipped it around, and the title of tonight's is When God Goes. When God goes. And I see three things that happen in this passage and consistently through the Bible when God says, I'm going to go. And I want to apply that to us this evening. The first is when God says, I'm going to go, a warning is given. And actually, in this passage, God gives two warnings. The first warning is to Abraham, and that's where we started. The passage that we read, they're with Abraham and say, we have to tell him. Give him a warning of what's happening. Before God ever goes to Sodom, he first goes to Abraham and tells him, this is what I'm going to do. Now, as I thought about it, he wasn't going to Abraham to get permission. It's not like God came to him and said, I think this is something I ought to do. Is that okay with you? I know you have family there, so I just wanted to check in and make sure that was all right. No, we don't see that. He told Abraham, the city's wicked. This is what's going to happen. He didn't go to Abraham to get Abraham's input. He didn't ask him, do you think I'm right in doing this? He went to Abraham to give him a warning. He knew that Lot was in Sodom and knew that Lot was Abraham's nephew and that basically Abraham had raised him. He knew Lot was important to Abraham. He's warning him. This is what's going to happen. Get your family out. And then he goes a step further and he warns Lot personally. Maybe you've thought of this before. I hadn't. God didn't have to go to Sodom and Gomorrah to see how wicked they were. God didn't say, I'm going to go to Sodom and Gomorrah. God didn't go simply because he needed to see it for himself. He already knew. He already knew. He is the all-knowing God. Being that he is all-knowing, it just makes sense to me. Maybe my mind's basic, but it just makes sense to me that he already knew exactly what was going on in those cities. But also, before he ever went, he said what was going on in those cities. Where we started with, again, he's talking about their cry and their grievous sin, that was before God ever went to Sodom. He knew. God didn't have to go to the cities to see their sin. He already knew he is God. He was going to give Lot a warning. And we see it all throughout the Bible. I think of Noah. A few weeks ago we looked at Noah. God was coming to destroy the earth for the wickedness, but before he did, he came to warn Noah over 100 years before it happened. He didn't have to. Could have said, I know they're wicked, I'm going to destroy them all. But before God goes, he gives a warning. And it's not only in times of destruction. I was thinking about it as I was studying for this. The birth of Jesus is no different. God was coming. And think of how many times before his birth that God gives a warning. It starts all the way back in Genesis. When Adam and Eve first sinned and God is talking to them and Satan, he already says, the time's coming that I'm going to go. Time's coming that I'm coming. How many prophets foretold of the coming of Jesus, giving a warning? I read an article this week that stated that 353 prophecies were fulfilled by Jesus coming back. That's a lot of warnings. That's a lot of warnings. The day is coming And shortly before Jesus actually came, God sends the angel to tell Mary and then again to tell Joseph. It was warning after warning after warning. When God says, let's go, it's time, I'm going to go, a warning is given. Number two, when God says, I'm going to go, the righteous are rescued. You can flip over one chapter if you'd like to. I'm going to read to you Genesis 19, 12 and 13. It says, And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides? Son-in-law and thy sons and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. Jump down to 15. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters. And the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. I read kind of both places on purpose, and I know calling Lot righteous is a stretch, but God rescues him. It's where the song by Mckenzie fits really well, that out of his will, still in his care. He's rescued. Lot is first given, put it this way, the option to leave. They advise him, if you will, get your family and get out of town. This is what's going to happen. You need to go. They tell him, this is going to be bad. God sent us to destroy the city. You need to get your family, get your things, and get out of town right now. And Lot delays. And you think about it, right off the bat, he obeyed. He goes and he talks to his son-in-laws, but they laughed at him. They didn't believe what he had to tell them, so then Lot stopped, and the Bible says he lingers. And our first thought is, what's wrong with you? I mean, you know harm is coming. You know what's going to happen. They've told you, why linger? Get out of there. Except, we do the same sort of thing. We know our sin is harmful. We know the hurt it'll bring. And maybe we have good intentions to stop. I think Lot really had good intentions to get his family together and go. But when his son-in-laws laughed at him, that changes things all of a sudden. But they don't take you serious. Got discouraged, and like Lot, we often will do the same, that we'll start with good intentions, get discouraged, and linger in our sin. So what Lot's doing, he tried to warn them, and they didn't believe him, and now he's content just to linger there a little longer, and they advise him to leave, and when that doesn't work, they forcibly remove him. You look at chapter 19, verse 16, it says, And while he lingered, I love this, the men laid hold on his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. They grabbed him by the hand and said, We're going. Passage makes it clear that it was only because God chose to be merciful to him. He had already been warned. He had already told him to leave, and he didn't. So the angel grabs a hold of them and drags them out of the city. And as I was saying this, I kept thinking, parents, how many times have you done this? You've told your kid, you should do this. I've advised you to do this, and they don't. So then you grab them and make them. You've given them some advice, thinking, son, this would be best for you, but they don't. You're hoping by advising them, you'll teach them to make the right decision on their own, but they didn't, so you make it for them. Advised to leave, and when that didn't happen, and he lingered a little more, the angel says, all right, we're going to make this happen. Yeah. But God rescued the righteous. And it's again something that we see consistently throughout the Bible. Again, using the example of Noah, he's such a good example of all this, that God is going to, again, destroy the world, but first, the righteous is rescued. We could give other examples as well, but all throughout the Bible, we see this, that when God says, I'm going to go, he gives a warning. When God says, I'm going to go, he rescues the righteous. And then when God says, I'm going to go, it's consistent throughout the Bible, the wicked will be judged. Genesis 19, verse 23. If you skip over to verse 23, it says, "The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar, and the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground." The picture of God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah must have been incredible. The Bible describes the way that he destroys the cities as raining fire and brimstone on them, so that they were completely consumed. The passage says that he overthrew the city and the plain and all the inhabitants and all that grew on the ground. They were completely consumed. And it went from what is believed to have been a rather large city to nothing. Fire falling from heaven, consuming everything and everyone, which is obviously the type of thing people would have seen. For one thing, you're in a plane. In a plane, you can see for miles. I remember the first time our family drove from Oklahoma to, I don't remember where on the West Coast, but somewhere on the West Coast. We were headed this way. And I was a kid, so, we're traveling and all the scenery is fun, and something new you get to see and all that. And then we got to the Great Plains. And I remember when we first got there being impressed, look how far you can see. This is really cool. You could see for miles. But it didn't take long before it wasn't so exciting, because that also meant you could drive for hours and still see exactly what you saw hours ago. It hasn't changed. You could see forever, and it felt like forever as you're driving across it, still seeing nothing but the same thing you saw. The point was that you could see what seemed like forever away. This city was in a plain. Everyone around would have been able to see the city. Then you have the fact that it's fire falling from heaven. That's going to catch some attention. This would have been something that caught your eye anyways. It would have been impressive. It would have been, like a train wreck you couldn't look away from, because it would have been obvious that this wasn't something just, that was your everyday occurrence. I don't know about you, I've never seen fire fall from heaven. Never seen fire and brimstone destroy an entire city. This isn't something that would have been, it's fire and brimstone, it's okay. No big deal. No, this is something that would have been obvious. Hey, God's doing something over there. But then also, Bible tells us Abraham could see it. Verses 27 through 28, 19, 27 through 28. "And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace." People saw that this had happened, which would have served as a warning to others that when God came, the wicked were judged. I told you I was going to give you three things that when God says, "I'm going to go," happen, and then I was going to apply it. And here's how I want to apply this to us. There is going to come a day that God will once again say, "It's time for me to go. It's time for me to go." We've been warned. Matthew 24, 31 through 37, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. "Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the door. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. But of that day and hour no man knoweth, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be." The day is coming that he'll return. It's been said over and over in the Bible, and when he does, just like it consistently is through the Bible, the righteous are going to be rescued. 1 Thessalonians 4:16, "For the Lord himself shall descend," it's talking about the same thing, "shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord." When the Lord returns, his people will be taken away, but also when the Lord returns, the wicked are going to be punished. Another passage, Revelation 20, 11 through 15. I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were open. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast in a lake of fire. This is the second death, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast in a lake of fire. When God comes back, the wicked will be judged. So the conclusion tonight is very, very simple. I'm not going to try and overcomplicate it or drag it out in any way at all. It is simply this: the day is coming that once again God's going to say, it's time for me to go. I'm going to go. Maybe today, as we know, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe 1,000 years from now. When that day comes, are you ready? And are you giving the warning to others? You've been warned. You know this is true. Are you ready? And are you giving that same warning to those around you?